Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, I want to talk about two things. First, I want to talk about something that came up in a conversation between me and Troy. Troy that I interviewed recently, where we talked about the future of America. I was talking to him on the phone and we were talking about this concept of like wanting to be more like the world, wanting to be more, moving in the direction of the great and spacious building, and how that kind of pops up from time to time in our church. And I have a few specific examples of that. And then I also wanted to talk about, there was like, and this all kind of like has to do with the last video that I did, because in the last video we were talking about being peacemakers. And this kind of goes along with this idea of having to be careful and cautious to not go toward the great and spacious building. But then also I was talking a lot about translation and the millennium and President Nelson's age and so forth. And I think there was some confusion on that. I've done many videos about the quickening / translation and stuff like that. But I wanted to basically read a comment that I left just to kind of clarify something on somebody else's comment, just in case you haven't been able to see those videos. And then afterwards, I want to tell you a little bit about the channel and where I plan to take it. So if you're interested in that, I've been like tweaking a lot of things, and I just want to give you the update on what I'm thinking right now. Before we get into the discussion, I want to give you the update on the Flood the Earth challenge. So right now we're at 6,099 copies of the Book of Mormon that have been shared. I'm hoping that we can keep driving forward and get to 10,000. That's kind of like the magic number that I have in my head. Of course, it's not about numbers. You should take each share and make it as personal as you possibly can. Pray about that person. Just don't become a robot or a salesperson. But it is also helpful to track your progress and to keep records like this. And so I'm happy to do that for you if you want to join this challenge. We had one more person join the challenge, which brings us to 615. So if you haven't done so already, I would encourage you to share the Book of Mormon, use the Gospel Library app. When you go to Scriptures, it'll have at the top a button where you can share the Book of Mormon app. And that makes it much, much easier to share the Book of Mormon, I think. But you can do it the traditional way, share a hard copy. And then once you do, just tell me what you did, how many you shared in the comments. Keep the comments short. Include hashtag flood in it and how you gave it. If it was a physical copy, a text, an email, direct message, whatever. And then I'll update it on here for you. And by doing this, I think it helps other people want to share the Book of Mormon, copies of the Book of Mormon that they otherwise would not have shared. So yeah, so let's keep on top of that. And good job, everybody. So in the last video where I was going over President Nelson's social media post, the clear message definitely seemed to be that we need to be peacemakers, and that Christ is the King of Peace, or he's the Prince of Peace, and he brings you peace, but we also need ourselves to promote peace in our personal lives and in the world. And that's a really good thing, and that is what we should do. We're trying to become a Zion people, and we need to try and get rid of contention, division, polarization, tribalism, stuff like that. Try and come together, not just with ourselves here in the church, but with others outside the church, and be friends and be friendly where we can. Hold true to our values when we need to, just like Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego in the book of Daniel. We recently read that book, and the message from that book is pretty clear. When you're in captivity by Babylon, you stick to your standards, but you serve as much as you can. You be of service. You're kind, but you don't go back on your values. So that's what the church does, and that's what we should do. However, there's this, I feel like in recent years, frankly, I feel like there's been this development of what some people call the teddy bear Jesus, where it's like they only focus on they kind of like misunderstand what Christ was about. A lot of people would cast him as someone that like just always nice to everybody, and nothing that you do is ever wrong, in that, you're loved by God and you don't need to change anything. And that's how some people want to take it, right? And so you get this development of a teddy bear Jesus where Christ, he gave a lot of warnings. They skip over the warnings that Christ gave when you read the New Testament. They skip over the one that like always sticks in my head is he said that he came not to bring peace but a sword, and that your enemy would be of your own household, that father would be against son, and I don't remember all the specific family relationships that he mentioned, but basically saying that families are going to be divided along gospel lines. People that choose to accept Christ, get on the covenant path, and those that don't. So it's going to be within your own family, and then of course your community and the people around you. So there's a lot of that going on. And I guess you have kind of like two main sides that I see, and this is what me and Troy were talking about. Of course, there's the side over here that wants to, justify all sorts of behavior. Nothing's wrong. You don't need to change. We need to completely accommodate you and your lifestyle, even though it's going against the commandments, and we shouldn't say anything bad. And it's true that we have to show respect and be kind and be inclusive. I can't stand saying that word because it's such a political word and such a buzzword, but we need to be inclusive while at the same time not going back on our values and not promoting things that are wrong. So, for example, I have my brother, and he decided that he wanted to do the transgender thing, and I bring him up from time to time. He is a biological male, and I talk to him. Somewhat regularly, and they came to visit last year, but I stick to my values. I don't become an advocate. I don't become an ally, because those are like the buzzwords that they like to use for people that aren't that way, but that support that cause and wanted to become more accepted. I don't do any of that. I just treat him like a human being, and I stick to my covenants, and I don't ostracize him. I don't cast him out of my life, but at the same time, I don't fall into that pit that the world is digging right now. So you have that side of the social political spectrum that people are falling into. And, but then you have the other side over here that's doing the same thing. It's all across the board. It's not just like one side or the other. There's people over here, and we were specifically talking about, and I don't mean to reopen a wound, but you'll recall that, I don't know how long ago it was. It's at least been a couple months that I was talking about the Hello Saints channel, and we had a lot of good discussion about it. I did some live streams, and I was just pointing out some red flags that I thought that everyone should be aware of. Some people are more trusting than others, and I want to be a friend and help and just let you know that there's maybe some issues there. And when I did those videos, everyone took it pretty well, I think, for the most part. There were a few that got really, really upset at me, and they're like, no, what he's doing is really good. He is building bridges and da-da-da-da. And I don't doubt that's what you believe. I tend to doubt, and it's okay for me to doubt that and use my own judgment. But Troy and I were talking about how there is another portion of people, it seems, that they want to get closer and closer and closer to, the rest of Christianity, for example. Like, they want to become more like evangelicals or whatever the case may be. And I'm all about building bridges. I've done it here on my channel. It's been a long time since I've had an evangelical on my channel, but if you go to my playlist called Special Guests, there was one that I talked to early on in the channel's history. Since that time, I've mostly focused on Jews, because I literally really want to learn about Judaism. Okay. And so I am all about building bridges with everybody. I've spoken very kindly about Muslims. I've pointed out many different times the church's section of the website that's for interfaith relations. And right now it's only the only content that they have there is for learning more about Islam and similarities and differences and stuff like that. I'm all about Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists. It's all good. But there starts to be a problem if what we're really trying to do is, for whatever reason, you decide to be a member of the church. Okay, maybe genuine, maybe not, but you feel that social pressure of feeling different, feeling other. And so when you see, like, for example, we get a lot of heat, probably from all religions. I can't say this for sure, but just from my life experience, probably from all religions, we receive the most heat, the most antagonism, the most attacks from other Christian churches. And it's understandable because we claim to be the one true church that Christ set up. So you could understand that others would be upset at that. We also have very distinct doctrines. There's a lot that we have in common, but there's a lot that's very, very different as well. Things that you don't find in other churches, right? We claim to have separate scripture. The Book of Mormon, the Book of Moses, the Book of Abraham, right? And then the Doctrine of Covenants, of course. So other Christian churches, which, they are different from each other. And I think sectarianism was like a bigger thing in the past. I think that over time, all these Christian churches, even though they're still distinct, they're kind of like just melding together for the most part. I'm no expert in that. I've never been any other denomination other than this church. But just from what I can see, it's all just kind of like meshing together. There's this movement of people that are going non-denominational. So, and there is fracturing over the LGBTQ issue. And I covered a recent story about that, how the United Methodist Church has been really cracking this year, like congregations leaving the church over that issue. But anyway, we have distinct doctrines, and we get persecuted and harassed by that all the time. And I'm sure that you've had it yourself. Maybe in the comments section somewhere of some video, maybe you've had some other Christian that's come to you and been like, oh, you believe in a different Jesus, and Joseph Smith was a phony, and blah, 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 all the different things that they say. And so that's a hard thing to bear. It's hard, and so depending on who you are, is going to determine this next part of what I want to talk about. How I think that if you have solid beliefs, you have a strong testimony, you have these principles inside of you, you're going to like endure those attacks, and it's not going to be pleasant, but you'll endure, and you'll stick to your beliefs and understand why the church is distinct. It can't just meld together with the rest of Christianity. It's separate. It's separate. It's the one true church. But people that maybe don't have as strong of a testimony, or if you're someone that's more socially inclined and you place more emphasis in your life on your social standing, you may be tempted to like go beyond just finding common ground and go past a certain line where you want to become, those other Christian denominations, because then it makes it more comfortable for you. There's less persecution. You'd be okay with, calling the Book of Mormon inspired fiction, or, whatever you'd want to say that, well, yeah, he's a prophet. That's just what we call him, but he doesn't actually receive revelation from God, or whatever. So that's what me and Troy were talking about, is this group of people that they would be all for, compromising our distinct beliefs and values in order to be accepted more or completely by the rest of Christianity. And those same people, I'm willing to bet, and I'm talking in broad terms, everyone's an individual, everyone has individual circumstances, but I'm sure there's a good portion of people that they're born into the church, and so the church is more their culture, it's what they were born into, and so you kind of stick with what you were born into. And in some cases you thrive, and it's like, yeah, I was born here. I was meant to be born here. We have the doctrine of the pre-existence, how the family that you're born to is not coincidence, and it's not arbitrary. The Lord specifically sends you, if you're Israel, if you're pre-existent Israel, if you were among the noble and great ones, you're sent to families, typically, that are the same. But mortal life is different from the pre-existence, and some people, they're born into this life, and it's mostly just a culture for them. It's just something that you do, especially when you live in places like Utah, Idaho, Mesa, Arizona, places like that, where there's a large population of Latter-day Saints. And and I think that's a lot of the complaints that people have about those places, is they can feel some of the fakeness, because there probably is a sizable portion that are fake. They're cultural members of the church. And you have the same thing happens with other churches too, in other religions. It's not just our church. A good example of that is in Judaism. You have the Reform Jews, where essentially they want to hold on to their Jewish identity, but they want to conform to the world. So they're very leftist. They're a lot less literal with the scriptures. It's basically like a non-religion. It's like barely hanging on to even being called a religion. It's more of just like a culture. It's like a club. And so you have members of the church that have that same attitude, but within our church, we don't have, it hasn't splintered so much to where we have like these big, divisions or sects, SECT, sects. We have had splinter groups that have broken off, like the FLDS, I always forget their name, the United Apostolic Brethren. That's the other polygamous group. And I know that there's more history there. I'm simplifying it, but we've had like small splinter groups, but nothing really too sizable. The largest one would be the Community of Christ, which used to be called the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And they're the ones that have the Spiral Temple in Missouri. And, we see what happened with them. They essentially did cross that line between staying distinct, finding common ground and staying distinct. They crossed that line to where now they're basically unrecognizable from what they once were. And I did an interview she used to be the president of the Council of the 12 Apostles of the Community of Christ. Her name is Linda Booth, and we were talking about their beliefs and stuff, and it's not really much different from any other just generic Christian church. I should put a link for that. I gotta do this right now, or else I'm gonna forget it. If you haven't seen that interview, it's kind of eye-opening. I'll put it on the screen. It's this video right here. Interview with Linda L. Booth, former president of the Council of the 12 Apostles of the Community of Christ. We had a good conversation. It was good. It was respectful. I appreciate them, and they seem fine to me, but it's pretty clear that at some point that church ultimately died. Like, as far as like their unique doctrines go. And now they're just kind of the same, like I said, the same as any other church. So uh, that's a risk that we face in the church. I don't think that the church as a whole would ever go that way and then go the same route that the community of Christ would go, that has gone. But there is danger with individuals in the church that really want to basically have one foot in the church and one foot in some other Christian church. Okay. And I always talk about evangelicals because they're the ones that are the most zealous. They're the ones that you usually come across. You have the Catholic Church. It still is the largest church in the world, but from my point of view, it seems like it's like half alive and half dead. It's basically a zombie. And if anything, it's becoming more and more dead as the years go by. In fact, right now, one of their most important areas is Africa. Like us, for some reason, Africa is really taking off as far as like spiritualism goes and belief in Christ. And so Africa is becoming much more important to the Catholic Church. But anyway, it's not so much the Catholics. Usually what I see is people within our church seeing the zeal, the enthusiasm of evangelicals, because the evangelicals are all about, it seems like a good portion of them are very, very interested in the second coming and eschatology. A lot of them are very interested in Israel, in siding with Israel, which again, that's something that our church does not do. It doesn't take sides in that conflict, but the evangelicals definitely do. They're very zealous, just broadly speaking. I'm sure there's some that are more in line with the way that we would believe as a church, more moderate and stuff, but that's the risk. And a lot of times when we think about the great and spacious building in Lehi's dream in the Book of Mormon, we usually think about like worldliness, so whenever I think of the great and spacious building, I think of like late night comedian talk show hosts there, Hollywood, these generic prime ministers of all these like European nations that are usually very secular and leftist. I see them there. There's like a whole group of people. I think that most people in the church probably view the great and spacious building as being more on the left, or, rich, prideful, elite, stuff like that. But that's not the great and spacious building. Okay. The great, and also that's equivalent to the great and abominable church. It's all churches that aren't the true church of God. And that sounds really harsh. We still have relations with them. But the fact is that we are distinct. This is the true church. And we can't lose sight of that. And we definitely shouldn't lose sight of that because we want to fit in socially with other people, because you feel squeamish when people bring that up, like, oh, you think that my church isn't true, or you really believe in the Book of Mormon, that's a whole bunch of hogwash, And so what we may classically think of when we're thinking about the great and spacious building as being like very worldly, gaudy people, it can be this too. Other false religions or apostate, or however you want to describe it, religions, churches that are not the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I don't know how else to say it. I'm trying to be like as good and respectful because, again, at any given time, I would definitely talk to an evangelical on the channel. I'm not really, but by the way, I'm not really in interview mode right now. All that I can really do at this point, I don't know how to explain this, but doing interviews, it kind of like wears me out. And at this point of time, it may change in the future. The only people I really want to talk to on the channel is Troy and Rabbi Gerfine, and that's it. I might get the motivation back at some point, but it just kind of, I don't know. Let me know what you think. You know, for those of you that have watched my other videos and the interviews that I've done in the past, I used to be pretty prolific with interviews, but not so much. But if you'd like to see that come back, let me know. I always like to try and, you know, feel the pulse on the channel and get a feel for what everyone's feeling. But the one last thing I would say, and this is just a little bit about the Hello Saints channel or any other like channels. I'm not aware of any other ones, but the idea with that channel is that he says that he's interested in learning about our church. I think a lot of people get hopeful about that and they're like, yes, this is great. We're building bridges. The thing about it though, is look at it this way. If I were to do a second channel and let's say that I wanted to, it's like geared toward, Jehovah's Witnesses, and I called it Hello Witnesses. Like for one, if I'm wanting to learn more about a group, I'm not sure that I would take the same approach. And actually I'm not, because I'm actually trying to learn more about Judaism. So I'll talk to Rabbi Gerfine, I'll talk to Eli Michel, I'll talk to Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz, I'll talk to these different people and ask them questions about Judaism. And I do not refute or say, well, that's really neat, but actually the way that I feel is blah, 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 because that's where the problem comes in, is that the channel is geared toward an LDS audience, and there's the sowing of the seeds of doubt. And that's something that I do not do with my Jewish guests. My audience is you, primarily members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and is to help you and to help me learn more about Judaism without trying to change my guests. I'm not trying to instill doubt in them. It's a completely different approach. You know, so I feel like it would be really weird to do like a Hello Witnesses, you know, with like their Bible in front of my face and then, you know, being like, yeah, okay, I've been to your meetings and I've read your translation of the Bible. It's pretty good. The only thing about it though is I don't know about this because we have a Joseph Smith translation that says this, or other people don't agree with this translation, or you know what I mean? I hope that makes sense. So, and I just know someone's going to say it. I know about that other guy that used to be an evangelical preacher. I can't remember his name, but I'm aware of his channel. He converted to our church. There's a possibility I'll talk to him in the future. I don't know, just not at this time. So if you're typing that right now, just don't even bother. But I'll think about it for the future. So, yeah, so that's the first thing that I wanted to talk about is, working on your testimony and understanding the importance of the church and that it really, really is the true church. And there cannot be compromise, when it comes to doctrines of the church. There can't be compromise. You can find common ground, which is like, oh, you and me believe that we should take care of the poor. Okay, very good. That's really good. We have something in common. You and I believe that family is important. Catholic Church and me, that's really good. Okay, let's try and work on different initiatives to strengthen the family, stuff like that. But when it comes to doctrinal issues, it's distinct. There are very important distinctions. And you can't just water it down. And if you have that tendency, if you look at other Christian churches and you're afraid of what they say about our church, you feel uncomfortable, that's understandable, but work on strengthening your testimony and understanding why our church is separate from other churches. Otherwise, what's the purpose? So just be aware of that, and don't fall into that trap, because Satan wants you to let go of the iron rod and go join the people that are laughing and pointing their fingers at you. Lehi's dream is so good. It's so good. It's so applicable. There's people off on strange paths. There's people going toward the great and spacious building, which is big and prideful. People are wearing nice clothes. They're pointing and laughing at the people that are on a very humble path, a straight path leading to the tree of life that'll bring eternal life, right? And you cannot find that in other churches. It doesn't matter how Christian they are or how much you agree with their values. They do not have the authority to bring you into the presence of God. They don't. They can bring you to Christ as far as like, you know, realizing the mission of Christ and that he's the Messiah, and give you a general sense of what he's supposed to do. But even that, they don't have completely correct. They have completely different ideas of how the afterlife works and what the purpose of the afterlife is, or the purpose of this life. It's very, very different. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about was some of the confusion that was left when I was talking about being translated during the millennium. Now, I've done many, many, many different videos about this. Okay. And I didn't prepare like a big thing of sources and quotes like I usually do, because I just wanted to briefly touch on this and just make you aware of the fact that, that I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out exactly how things work before the second coming, into the second coming, after, or in the millennium, after the millennium, when it comes to translation, resurrection, so on and so forth. And so I'm just going to give you just kind of in a nutshell what I have learned and the order of events. And this comes from all different sources, including General Conference. A lot of it comes from Bruce R. McConkie and Joseph Fielding Smith, because between the two of them, they covered many, many, many different doctrines of the church. But it's not hard to find. If you take the appropriate amount of time and you look into it, you'll understand how everything goes. So I'm just going to read this off the screen. I'm not going to put it on the screen. But okay, so first, okay, what happens first is, my understanding is, what happens first is at the second coming, it would seem just before Christ's appearance to the Jews and to the rest of the world, you have the resurrection of the righteous, and you have the translation of those that are righteous on the earth. So, and this is what I believe we're mostly talking about when we're talking about the 5 wise virgins. So we know that going into the millennium, the only people that are going to be permitted to live in that millennial world is anybody on earth, whether they're a member of the church or not, anyone that is at least living a terrestrial law in this life. If you're living a telestial law, and if you're a member of the church, or if you are not a member of the church, you're going to be cleansed off the face of the earth. There's no easy way to say it. That there's going to be a burning. Just like there was the flood at the time of Noah, and the earth was flooded and baptized. The same thing is going to happen at the second coming, but it's going to be the baptism of fire. The earth is going to be cleansed. It's going to receive the Holy Ghost. So, for this resurrection / quickening event, all the scriptures that I've read, it happens at the same time, and then that group of people go up to Christ in the cloud, or the midst of the pillar of heaven, whatever that means. Okay, and then you have the burning that takes place. Well, no, sorry, before that, I think before that, and this is even kind of unclear, but before that, Christ will come down to the Jews first with those that are resurrected and those that are translated. And then also he'll appear to the world again, from my understanding, with those same groups, those that are resurrected and those that are righteous and translated. The burning will take place in the midst of this at some point. I suppose immediately after the burning is going to take place. Everybody on earth, not just that group that was resurrected and translated, but everybody else is going to be translated. Okay. And that's where we get the idea of like the heathen that are going to be there in the millennium. It's basically just referring to all those different people that are members of different religions, churches, because in the millennium, it's not just going to be members of the church. It's going to be, there's still going to be all these different belief systems. And we've done videos talking about that. In fact, recently we were talking about that as to why some would remain agnostic, even though Christ was there. Well, we talked about that recently. Now, during the first part of the millennium, only those that are worthy of a celestial glory are going to be resurrected. This is at the first part of the millennium. And from what I've read and studied, it seems that during that first part, there's like a continual like resurrection going, the first resurrection of the righteous. And what I've been trying to understand and figure out is you have that initial group of righteous saints that are going to that have been resurrected to a celestial glory. But then after that, we're still going to be doing temple work for the dead. And I think what has to happen is that you have to have your temple work done and then have accepted it in the spirit world. And then once you're deemed worthy of whatever glory, in this case, celestial glory, then you'll be resurrected. So the first part of the millennium, I think a lot of that is going to be taking place. Those that are righteous, that are worthy in the spirit world are going to be resurrected at that point. Those that didn't, I guess, whose work wasn't done in time when Christ first came down. I think I'm not entirely sure about that, but what I do know is that the first part of the millennium is only for celestials. Okay. And then, everybody else that's on the earth, all the mortals in their translated state, are going to live to 100 years old. And then at that point, they're going to be resurrected. They're going to go through death, but not death like we've experienced it. It's going to be like you're alive, you're in a translated state, you die, but in the twinkling of an eye, you go from translated to resurrected. Now, what I don't know is if at the beginning part of the millennium, again, if you're a mortal and you were living a celestial law, that's absolutely what would happen. But if you were terrestrial and only living a terrestrial law at the time that you die, I don't know if you have to wait till later, because that leads into the next point. Later in the millennium, at some point, and it's not specified, but later in the millennium, that's when those that lived a terrestrial law are going to be resurrected. So celestials first, terrestrials later. And then at the end of the 1,000 years, at the end of the millennium, that's when the telestials are going to be resurrected. And so all these people that are currently living a telestial law that are going to be burned at the second coming, they're going to be in the spirit world for 1,000 years. And then at the end of the 1,000 years, then they'll be resurrected. And that's also when the earth is going to die. It is going to die. Joseph Fielding Smith, I wish I had it right here. I don't. But he was talking about how the earth will essentially, I think he used the word decompensate. It'll basically die, and then it'll be resurrected into a celestial sphere. And that's the point at which it'll become a sea of glass. That's when Earth attains its celestial glory. So, um, it seems like it's just as simple as that. The one thing I don't know, like I said, is if you lived a terrestrial life at the very beginning of the millennium, say like within the first 5, 10, 20 years you die, and you're only living a terrestrial law. What I don't know is if at that point you get resurrected, or if you wait until later once the terrestrial resurrection begins. So that's something I don't know. And I'd love to hear what you think about that. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe the mortals that are living a terrestrial law, if they actually would be resurrected right then and there, because there's also the idea that there's no longer going to be death the way that we know it. So it may be that those first groups of people that are living in terrestrial law, they will just go ahead and be twinkled right away once they reach their 100 years. And maybe when we're talking about the terrestrial resurrection, maybe what it is that we're talking about those that are in the spirit world from, past generations. So maybe that's all that's referring to. That's something I don't know. And then there's the important distinction between being transfigured and translated or quickened. So transfigured is when there's a temporary change that comes on your body. And it seems to be for two purposes. One purpose may be that you're going to be in the presence of God, like Moses, for example, or Joseph Smith. They were both changed. The Mount of Transfiguration. So they were temporarily changed in order to withstand the presence of God and a very holy experience. So that's one reason that you'd be temporarily changed, but then changed back. The other reason why you'd be transfigured, like we've studied, is, for example, you had Moses, Elijah, and I actually did a video about this maybe like a month or two ago. Why were they transfigured? It's because, it's because they had to have physical bodies in order to bestow the keys at the Mount of Transfiguration. That's what we read, is that they held the keys, they gave the keys to those at the Mount of Transfiguration. And then after that, once Christ was resurrected, they also became resurrected. But then they received the keys back, and they were the ones that delivered those keys to Joseph Smith in the Kirtland Temple. The city of Enoch, we learned, they were initially translated. Well, now I'm starting to talk about translation. But I'm talking about it in the sense of like transfiguration, because when you're transfigured, and this is something that we learned in the Millennial Messiah, he talked about someone who's been translated, like those in the city of Enoch, the three Nephites, John, like this type of transfiguration. You can no longer reproduce, and it has to do with blood, because you no longer have blood in your body. There's a change that comes upon you. You no longer participate in reproduction in this mortal life. Okay. Those that were before Christ, they would have been resurrected, but the resurrection hadn't taken place yet. And so they were transfigured in order to accomplish those missions. But once Christ was, once he was resurrected, then they also were resurrected. In the case of the three Nephites in John, they became transfigured because they're performing a special mission here on the earth right now. They're bringing people to Christ And I have a playlist about the three Nephites and John with very interesting stories that I've collected. And you can go check that out. But they also cannot currently reproduce because their mortal probation is over. They're not in this part of mortality anymore. Now, when the rest of us, and I am assuming that I'll make it, I hope that I do, the rest of us that move on into the millennium, the same thing will happen with us. It's essentially the same thing, you know. It's basically a very small difference. It's basically the same state of body with the exception that you can reproduce in the millennium. So there is that distinction. And it's not going to be temporary or for any very special mission. So your body's going to be changed in order for you to live on this new earth. I don't know if it's so that you can be in the presence of Christ as well. That may have something to do with it, but we know that the earth itself is going to change in really drastic ways. And we've talked about temperature recently. We've talked about temperature and how it's my theory that the earth is going to get hotter and hotter. It's meant to. It's like a higher state of energy, you know. Brigham Young said that, and I think Joseph Fielding Smith too, I can't remember, but they said that essentially worlds, when they obtain their exaltation, they become worlds of light. They become stars, essentially. And that flies in the face of astronomy, but that's what they say. And I believe it. And so if you become a world of light, there's probably a lot more energy being emitted from that world, and it's probably hotter. And so your body would naturally have to, it can't just remain the way that it is right now in order to endure that. And a lot of people have been like, well, I don't know if I'm going to like that kind of world. Believe me, it's going to be amazing. I don't know what it's going to look like, but it is going to be more amazing than what we have now. It absolutely will be. I don't think anyone's going to look back and be like, oh man, I miss the old earth. I don't think that's going to happen. That's just my opinion. But anyway, those that are going to be living during the millennium, it's not, the purpose of that translation is not temporary in nature. It's going to happen to everybody so that everybody can continue having a mortal experience on earth, those that are born during that time and those that make it into the millennium. Whereas those before had specific missions or they were only in the presence of God for a short time, and so they needed that change. Okay, so hopefully that's not too confusing. If you want to learn more about it and how I came to that understanding, and I have put a lot of time into it, and this won't be the end of it either. I'm pretty sure I'll come across more stuff that I'll share later. Just do a search on my channel. There's a little search bar. I don't know if you know this, but on every YouTube channel, there's a little search bar where you can search different topics. So just type in translated, translation, quickened, quickening, transfigure, whatever, and it'll definitely pull up videos for you to watch. But it's really exciting because the one thing that I do know going into the translation is that there's no longer going to be any more sickness or disease. And I would assume, and it is an assumption, that would probably carry over to things like mental illness, probably other physical defects, I would assume. I would like to know if my hearing will come back in my right ear. Maybe not. Maybe it will. If my back, if my slip disc will be fixed, and many, many other things. It's gonna be really good. It's something to look forward to. It's gonna be mind blowing. It's gonna be literally a completely different world once we get to that point. So, is that all I have to say? Oh, I had some channel business. So I keep going back and forth. As of right now, I think I will just keep everything on this channel. I know I said in a recent video that I was going to go ahead and start up the watch for the signs channel again, but I'm not. I think I realized what I needed to do. I'm trying to feel out what works best for this channel, both what everybody wants and what actually seems to work the best, because, you know, I have access to all the numbers. Like if you have a YouTube channel, they give you analytics and you can look and see what people are interested in, what they want to see, you know. So I'm trying to take it all in together to have the best possible channel that I can. So I'm sorry for all the confusion, but as of right now, I'm pretty sure I'm going to keep just everything on this channel. I'm always open to suggestions, except for I've had enough of the, you know, make it more concise, make it more to the point. I can't. Okay. That would take even more time. And I don't have that to give. And I appreciate the advice, but I can't do that. I've got to do it the way that I'm doing it right now. It's what works. And, I mean, if it didn't work, I wouldn't be as far as I am right now with YouTube. Let's just put it that way. If it wasn't working, then maybe I would try that, but it's clearly working. So yeah, so there's that. All right, well, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.